Ready, set, go, man, go. I got a gal that I love so.
Have you ever noticed that there's just some people who help define a decade? Like Elvis Presley during the 1950s or Martin Luther King Jr. during the 1960s. There are a few individuals who stand out for me in the 1980s, like Michael Jordan, Madonna, and Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan? The actor? Then who's vice president? Jerry Lewis?
The Gipper's presidency lasted most of the 80s, and while serving as leader of the free world for 2 terms might sound impressive, did he ever drink from the cup of Christ? Or eat chilled monkey brains? No, for me, the individual who most clearly defined the 1980s was an archaeologist known as Dr. Henry Jones Jr. Or his audience knew him, Indiana Jones.
We named the dog Indiana.
The same year that Reagan started his first term, Indiana burst onto the silver screen. Now, while the original Indiana Jones trilogy was quintessentially 80s, the films themselves do not take place during that time period. Chronologically, The Temple of Doom takes place in 1935, Raiders of the Lost Ark takes place in 1936, and The Last Crusade in 1938. It should also be noted that most of the inspiration for these 3 films came before the 80s as well. The dynamic duo of Steven Spielberg and George Lucas drew from their love of pulp magazines and Saturday morning serials. That's serials like a story appearing in regular installments and not a bowl of Cocoa Puffs you'd eat while watching Scooby-Doo. I also love all the nods to classic films like Casablanca and Lawrence of Arabia. Both Lucas and Spielberg had made quite the names for themselves during the 70s. Steven achieved directorial stardom with Jaws, and George had revitalized science fiction with Star Wars.
We have no time. If you still want the Ark, it has been loaded onto a truck for Cairo.
With Raiders of the Lost Ark, they gifted audiences with the kind of film that felt rooted in the Hollywood of old, whilst still feeling new and fresh. Actor Harrison Ford brought our hero to life and felt like an amalgamation of men like Rick Blaine, James Bond, and Scrooge McDuck?
Clip my tail feathers and call me Baldy.
What? You weren't aware that George Lucas was a fan of old Scrooge? Well, he used to collect the Uncle Scrooge comic book as a child and described the storytelling as cinematic. Now, many of you already know that Ford was not Lucas's first choice. During the casting process, it looked like Tom Selleck might take on the role, but CBS wasn't cool with that. They didn't think the Magnum PI star could also be Indiana Jones, so instead, we would end up with Spielberg's first choice. Another essential part of Raiders of the Lost Ark was the film score. Spielberg and Lucas brought in their frequent collaborator, the legendary John Williams. The soundtrack is so iconic and instantly recognizable. Raiders of the Lost Ark went on to become a huge hit in 1981, becoming the highest grossing film of that year and winning 5 Academy Awards. It was so popular amongst audiences that Marvel Comic Books produced an adaptation of the film. Kenner gave us several action figures to coincide with the film as well.
It's Indiana Jones, a large-size action figure.
That boulder's coming in fast!
He's new from Kenner's Raiders of the Lost Ark collection.
Stay low, Indiana. They're right behind you. Use your whip. Whoa, I'm slipping. Oh! A snake pit. Get me out of here. Snap!
Indiana Jones, a large-size action figure from Raiders of the Lost Ark collection, new from Kenner.
Howard Scott Warshaw even designed a Raiders of the Lost Ark video game for the Atari 2600, and if that name sounds familiar, yes, he was the man responsible for that notorious E.T. video game. That same year, Activision introduced gamers to Pitfall Harry, a side-scrolling fortune hunter doing his best to avoid scorpions, crocodiles, and snakes.
Why did it have to be snakes?
Indiana Jones was more than just a cinematic hero. He was a pop culture icon whose influence could be seen across all forms of entertainment. So of course, he'd return to theaters in 1984 for another adventure. This time, audiences could enjoy Indy's spunky little sidekick,
Shut down.
an actual show tune number, if you can believe it, and of course, that incredible minecart chase. That scene was just the best, and I think that's why I fell in love with those minecart levels on Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo. Yeah, they were difficult, but it felt like a fun way to put gamers in control of that iconic Indiana Jones experience. That's how I felt anyways. Maybe you folks can tell me if I'm way off. While Temple of Doom didn't receive the same level of praise as Raiders, Indiana Jones would continue to have a larger impact on pop culture as a whole. Like when Indiana Frog took on Molaram in an episode of Muppet Babies.
Gee, this never happens to Indiana Jones.
Uncle Scrooge would get his own television show during the 80s, hijacking a number of elements from Indiana Jones, including that iconic font. The Rescue Rangers premiered on the Disney Afternoon cartoon block in 1989, and you probably noticed that Chip borrowed his look from Indy. Of course, in an ironic twist, Dale kind of dresses like Magnum P.I. Disney's MGM Studios also opened in '89, and Dr. Jones got his own theme park attraction. The Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular let you relive some of your favorite scenes from Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it was one of my favorite experiences at the Walt Disney World Resort. Oh, and before I forget to mention it, both Indiana Jones and Sala made a cameo in the Great Movie Ride as well. 1989 also marked Indy's last crusade, so to speak. Man, I love this movie so much. It was actually the first time I got to see an Indiana Jones film in theaters. It was great seeing Indy beat up on Nazis once more.
No ticket.
River Phoenix did a great job as a younger Indiana Jones, and having James Bond play Indy's dad was brilliant.
Thank you. It was rather wonderful.
Honestly, Indiana Jones was never more relevant as he was during the 80s.
While you're up, would you get me a soft drink?
Discover real cola taste with just 1 calorie. Diet Coke.
Sure, in the 90s we did get a television series highlighting the adventures of young Indiana Jones. That was exciting and educational for kids. Harrison Ford even reprised his role for one episode, and since it was during the filming of The Fugitive, we got to see Indy with a beard. An Indiana Jones-inspired ride opened in Disneyland Paris in 1993. The Temple of the Forbidden Eye opened in California in 1995, and Disneyland in California did it so well that Tokyo followed suit in 2001. There was a fourth film in 2008 that left fans polarized, and we'll get a new film in 2023. Now, I'm cautiously optimistic, but I don't expect the excitement that people have for the character will ever be the same as it was when I was young. The first 3 Indiana Jones films came out at the perfect time when audiences were starved for this kind of media. They seemed to combine the best parts of action, adventure, horror, and romance. What's more, the use of practical effects instead of computer-generated effects help these films feel more authentic. The original trilogy feels like a love letter to old Hollywood, at times almost a parody. and I wouldn't have it any other way.
What's that?
Antidote. To what? The poison you just drank up.
But I don't know. What do you all think? What's your favorite Indiana Jones adventure? And were there any important milestones that I left out of this video? Please let us know in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to drop a like and be sure to subscribe to Retro Spectrum so you don't miss a single episode of Details.